recap. It's time for the recap. We're making the recap. It's the recap show. Welcome to the recap. I'm giving you the recap. Who's doing the recap? It's this guy you know. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Disorganized Play, GM prep for the rest of us. The rest of us being me and maybe you. So, we are not prepping today, right? Oh, I should change this. We are instead recapping. Oh, the bloody recap. Oh, scary. For those of you who are new to this show, you picked a fine time to tune in because I'm taking a 2-week break for the holidays. So, we are playing through Storm King's Thunder, the entire hardbound adventure from Wizards of the Coast, at my friendly local game store, FLGS, as it is known in the common parlance. And so every Tuesday, I talk about what might happen at that session. On Wednesday, I scurry off and play. And on Thursday, I come back and tell you how it all went wrong. So that is the premise of the show. We do a setup on Tuesday, we go off and play it on Wednesday, and we come back and I shape it all up for you on Thursdays. So guess where we are? We're at the final Thursday installment of 2016. There's no game next week, so I won't be doing the stream next week. I appreciate all of your time and attention, but I'm going to release that time and attention back into the wild, onto your own recognizance. You have 2 weeks to do with it and make merry as you see fit. So please go out and get some gaming in. That is what I advise. That is what I advise. I don't want this thing to show up on my screen. I can't. Thank you, dumb comment bits thing. Have no fear. I have fear because I can't make you go away. Twitch interface is being a little rowdy with me this morning. Or rather, this afternoon. So, alright. I think I made it go away. We're going to find out. So, today, in our agenda, we are going to talk about the recap of the session, what happened. We're going to talk about NPCs being the voice of the DM and the pros and cons that are attached to that. And we'll have some time for some Q&A. So if you are curious about something that's going on in your game, you're not happy with something that's going on in your game, or maybe you're very proud of the dogfight that's happening outside of your apartment and you would like to share it with everybody, then I recommend that you become a Twitch broadcaster and share the intimate details of your apartment life with dozens of people on the internet. So that's our agenda today. Let's get into it. Where did we last leave our heroes? I hope everybody can hear me okay. It looks like the stream is maybe a little janky today. All right. At any rate, drop a line in the chat if you have a question or if there's a quality issue. We left our party. They had accepted the mission in Calling Horns to go off into the Evermoors and find out what was causing all of these trolls to come streaming out of their natural roaming area and start attacking the settlements, the more civilized areas around the Evermoors, kind of getting out of their natural swamp home terrain and ranging further afield. So that was what they had accepted. They were not sure, coming back a week later, what their mission actually was. Oh, we have to go kill all the trolls in the Evermoors. That was not your... No, that is... We are not prepared to... Let's make a mini campaign out of that. That sounds like fun, but no. So I clarified that for them. I will say, aside from events in the game, one of the players brought a little miniature feast from the grocery store, like literally an entire roasted chicken, and a couple of things of buns and some prosciutto and cheese, and we had kind of like a little dinner party at our game because it was the final end of the year, and also one of the players brought presents. So if you go over to twitter.com/eldunjardobastardo, you can see, you can't see the food, but you can see the dice. They're cool little skull dice. So if you're going to do yeah, do something nice for your DM. That's what I recommend. So with that, after we had eaten our sandwiches, uh, it also encountered a group of about 20 tribal warriors, right? Uthgardt barbarians, to be specific, along with a shaman that they knew that the shaman was performing some sort of weird ritual where they had killed a bunch of elk and they were slaughtering the pieces apart and eating them, but also like eating the heart and da 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 da, right? So they spied on this activity. They decided not to involve themselves in the activity. That was one of their decision points, was, do we want to intrude on these guys? Do we want to approach them? Do we want to attack them? All right? And finally, do we just want to leave them alone, which is what they ended up doing. So those were the options that were in front of them, and honestly, I did not want them to attack the barbarians. There's always the potential, right, that players just get bored and decide, well, these guys are here for us to slaughter, so let's do it. And that's a dangerous thing, but it did not happen in this particular case. It was the top of the session, so they weren't that bored. That's the good news. I think sometimes when I've seen those things happen, it's like you've had a long, aimless kind of session where some of the players either not involved in what's going on, or they just don't know what they're supposed to do next, so out of frustration they will attack whatever NPC kind of comes by and seems justifiable to attack, right? I mean, these are Uthgardt barbarians. They're the scum of the earth. They're basically orcs with human skin. Let's just murder them. You know, let's have a little fun and roll some dice and kill some stuff. So I would caution you guys when you're introducing encounters that have a lot of role-playing potential, like this one did. And I kind of stacked the deck that there's 18 of them, and they didn't know how tough they were. Like, well, you're outnumbered 3-1. And they had used some magic, so you know they're not just regular mook kind of tribal warriors, although it turned out that most of them were. So I caution you guys, like, when those kind of encounters come towards the end of a gaming session, you have to be aware of what has gone on before and how much you have shown the spotlight around the table. Because if you've had a really RP-heavy session, and it's basically just like the bard and the cleric, or the bard and the sorcerer kind of tag teaming all of the social objectives in the session, and your dwarven fighter has been sidelined and knows that he can't make good rolls. Danger of a system like this is, like, if he feels like, well, the things I'm good at are not being brought to bear, then he may look for an opportunity to bring that stuff to bear on kind of the most flip excuse possible. So that's something to be careful about, right? It's more of an issue that you haven't balanced the previous encounter in terms of player involvement than it is necessarily that you introduced an encounter that they somehow short-circuited by attacking. You know, so it's really the the symptom there is not that, well, if they just see cardboard cutout warriors, they're going to cut them down. That's not so much the case as it's a result of the previous 2.5 hours were just them sitting around talking about what they're going to do next, or trying to pump an NPC in for information, or try to persuade an NPC to do something that they want them to do, and somebody was not involved enough in the game. You know, like they felt like their role was diminished. Hey, that's a little DMing tangent we just went off on there. So something to think about. They did not, fortunately, like the deck had been stacked at the end of last session, so they didn't do that. We had a really long kind of social non-combat session last week, and when they got to they did fight some trolls, so they kind of got that out of their blood a little bit, and then they got to the warriors, and we were running late on time, so it was like, you guys can think about attacking them if you want, but we're going to cut here, and we'll figure out next week what we're going to do. That's always a good game reset, you know, well, it's not a good tactic, but it's a nice out. Is you introduce that encounter and you get out and say we're gonna pick it up next week. So we picked it up. They decided to leave him alone. That's the long. that's the short version of that long answer I just gave. So they decided to leave them alone. They kept a watch overnight. I conveyed how this ritual ceremony thing, whatever they were doing, kept going until like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. It didn't keep them from getting sleep, but it's definitely something that they noticed. And then, boom, right away, like 2.5 hours later, like 6 a.m., it's time to get up. And the two guys who are on the tail end of the morning watch noticed that there's this group of 5 warriors who are coming through the swamp, and they're out hunting breakfast. Like, they clearly don't know exactly what's going on, but then they scare up this raccoon who runs across and starts... And I kind of made some random rolls to get a feel for, like, is this raccoon running directly for their camp, or is this raccoon just happen to be going in the direction a little bit? Well, he was going directly for the camp. And so the raccoon runs right up to the camp. The dwarven fighter stabs the thing and kills it. Like, you don't really have to roll for that. I think I had him roll to hit, and that was about it. Like, just make sure you hit it. It's not going to be too difficult. But so then the warriors approach. Now, the thing about these tribal warriors were they do not speak common. And I wasn't really in the mood to have the whole, like, pantomime, like, make up some gibberish language, munga gunga, whatever. Like, it's borderline offensive, and it's tedious, and I knew that the chief shaman spoke common, so I was like, let's establish that there's sort of something friendly going on here, or non-threatening. Not necessarily friendly, but non-threatening going on. Let's establish that, and then let's have the shaman come back and actually talk to these guys, so we can have a thing where the whole table is involved in the conversation. That's another trap that you can fall into, is only one character in the party speaks giant, and it turns out, like, okay, I'm pipelining you all of this information, and technically the rest of the table doesn't know what's happening. That's a fun exercise every once in a great while, but it is not a fun exercise. Like, just, it's boring to repeat something, to have a character repeat something that you just said. Unless there's a purpose to it, where it's like, they've got to get something exactly right. I don't bother. So they, the warriors kind of like squared up and like, oh, kind of a little bit of who are you and what's going on. And then the one guy in the back like turned around and was like started to go get help. And at this point, the monk like shadow steps, boom, and appears right in front of him. And I'm like, okay, are you trying to intimidate this guy or whatever? I think he rolled a pretty crappy intimidation roll, even though it was a very intimidating move. But at that point, the dwarven fighter rogue interceded and like offered them the raccoon and like kind of held it out, was not making threatening gestures, and he made a good persuasion check. So I'm like, all right, well they're calmed by your offering, your sort of peace offering type of thing. So they kind of like wave at each other and take the raccoon and put it in their bag, and then they turned around and went to their camp. That broke into another round of discussion of, okay, well now do we want to go intercept them because they're probably going to get help and come back, or do we want to just not do anything, or do we want to evacuate, or do we want to like kind of charge over there? Like, what do we want to do? And it was kind of this, it's hard for the party to decide. The fighter rogue wanted to like hole up in a tree and like be hidden so that if something broke out, he could take pot shots at them and get the jump on them. And everybody else, the monk was very much like, well, now I want to talk to them, even though he had done this intimidating move earlier. So that was honestly, that was a little boring for me. Like, there's times where you present a situation and you have an idea of what's going to happen next, but you have to just sort of like sit back and let the party talk through whatever the party is going to let them kind of decide. Do we want to hide? Do we want to attack these guys? Da, da, da. And in the meantime, that like they're spending 10 minutes talking about it, so there's probably 10 minutes of real game time actually passing while they debate what they should do. Like, I think that's reasonable to assume. Well, I knew that 10 minutes later, the rest of the hunting party was going to, the tribal warrior party, the Uthgardt barbarians, was all going to show up. So that was fine. I mean, about the time that they had somewhat reached an idea, I'm like, well, you see these guys coming towards you. Like, that's enough sort of circular discussion of what are we going to do, where are we going to go, blah, 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 blah. Like, let's get to the meat of the encounter here. So the shaman shows up with their 18 warriors behind him, and he does speak common, so he sort of introduces himself. Well, the bard goes out to talk to him. Now, the bard in this party is a 14-year-old boy. So it's always a little bit weird when the bard presents himself as sort of the voice of the party, because imagine, if you will, 2 dwarves, a dragonborn, a half-elf drow, and a gnome cleric, all fronted by this 14-year-old human bard. So it's a little bit strange, but, you know, that just gave me an opportunity for the shaman to make comments about it. Oh, well, this boy is going to... You 14-year-old boy, you're a fighter. He's like, I'm a fighter. I'm a lover. I'm an artist. and I'm like, all right, I'll make a persuasion check. He made a good persuasion check. And, you know, the shaman at that point is amused. Like, when I'm 14, I also fighter. I also lover. I also artist. So don't deny yourself the opportunity to accept the ostensibly absurd situation that is presented before you sometimes when the party does stuff like that. Like, see the truth, acknowledge it, but then have some sort of non-predictable, non-obvious reaction to it. Because I think the obvious reaction would be, I'm insulted that this 14-year-old boy, and prove to me that you're a mighty warrior. I want to talk with the strongest person in your party, not the weakest. Da, 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 da. That's fine. That's not, you know, you can have a trial by combat kind of thing, or just make some strength checks, or arm wrestle, or bear wrestle, or, you know, whatever your ritual determination of who's the top dog is. Like, you can do that. That's fine. But also, you can just shortcut that scene and have the PC be amused by this. He's got these guys outnumbered 3-1. He's not particularly worried. I mean, he's somewhat worried because you never know what kind of magic they've got at their disposal. But he can be charmed and amused by the bard. No problem. So they get around to asking, like, why are you guys out here? We heard you having your ritual and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're hunting a dragon. Great worm. We hunt great worm. And they were like, dragon? And it's like, well, yeah, apparently the dragon's lair has been taken over by giants. He's been chased out of his lair. The giants have sort of set a trap for him. They're trying to capture dragons for whatever reason. They're fire giants, and so the dragon is out in the swamp and trying to gather trolls and make a new lair. So he's impressing these trolls into, like, slave labor and having them dig up this new lair in a new part of the swamp. So that was, you know, the whole reason I decided on that encounter is, in the book is written, it talked about, you know, they eventually find a fire giant mistreating a troll and whether they attack him or not or whatever. And we'd had a fairly extensive interaction with fire giants. It had gone over the course of like 3 sessions or something like that. Really, the fallout of it continues to kind of trail behind them, or at least trickle out from tribal war. The news begins to spread that these guys killed the fire giant and whatnot. So I decided to swap in a dragon just because it was something different than a fire giant. I also looked at swapping in some stuff from Volo's guide and swap in, like, I really wanted to use an Illithid riding a froggy moth, but that seemed too far afield from the story, right? It's going to raise a lot of questions if they go, well, why is this mind flayer working with the dragons to help round up trolls? Either that, or it's going to feel like it was totally disconnected from the story. And if you have an encounter that's totally disconnected from the story, that can be okay. The danger that you run is that the players are going to try to connect it to the story, right? The players want to build this, like, kind of like web of like, okay, this is the ladder of logic that we keep climbing, and when we get to the top, there's loot, and then we put together the rest of the ladder of logic, etc. So, regardless of whether you want this encounter to be a standalone, does not involve other people, is not related to the greater goings on of whatever's happening in your meta plot, your overarching plot. Whether you want that or not, your players are going to try to make it happen. And so if it is a standalone encounter that's not related to what's going on, you do have to kind of have a hip pocket of like, well, here's why it's not, or here's some indication that this is actually just a random event and it's not a coincidence, it's not foreshadowing, it's not part of the greater adventure. I think you can still make encounters like that tied to the greater adventure, but you need to filter them through the lens of these are things that are happening in the world. So either this is a result of something that's happening in the wider meta plot. You're not going to learn anything new about the meta plot. You just can see that there's effects that are trickling down. Or it needs to be kind of the meta plot has not reached this particular area or this encounter. Like it's the fact that it doesn't have effects is something that you're showing, right? Here's the world without the influence of the shadow mages who've come to stalk the land and are draining, fire and heat from everything that they touch, right? So that's something to think about. Is you might have an encounter that's not directly related to your creepy heat-stealing shadow mages, but an effect of that might be, oh, okay, all these monsters have been driven out of the forest because they can no longer find food because all the lakes are frozen over. Therefore, that's causing problems, over here. You're not going to learn anything about the shadow mages, but you are going to be able to intercede in an effect, kind of the concentric circles. You throw the rock in the pond, and you're actually out on the edge of the circles. It's also a valuable lesson to go, oh, these people are, throwing this wild harvest festival. They're gorging themselves on food. They're slaughtering a whole bunch of their animals. They don't really have much in the way of extra stores. They put their normal stuff aside. And clearly they don't know about the danger that's being posed by the creepy shadow mages who are going to visit, never-ending winter upon the land. If you're wondering where all this stuff came from, I'm just basically making it up based on some old stuff that happened in an old campaign, not related to Storm King's Thunder. I'm just using it as an example of the ways that both showing the effects of the plot and showing the places where the plot has not yet touched are be equally valuable to the player's understanding what's happening in the world, right? Okay, so we're off dragon hunting, and I also established some things that these Uthgardt barbarians were heavy into, like ritualized sacrifice, and not in a super creepy way, but in a lot of like, if you kill an elk, you eat the heart of the elk, and then you have the heart of the elk, and then later on they ended up like trying to hunt down a troll. Like, why are you hunting a troll? Well, you kill a troll, you eat the troll, you get the heart of a troll. Your blood pounds and your hands sweat and you grow more hair and all this kind of stuff. So that also gave them a motive for chasing this dragon. We want to eat the heart of the dragon. We want to gain the dragon's power. So that was pretty cool. It was a nice like framing device. Like, now you get their culture, now you get what's going on. They had a blood oath ritual where they swore the party into allegiance with the band of barbarians, and then they took off into the swamp. So we go into the swamp. It takes them about a little over a day, and they realize that they're getting close to where the lair is, because this fish kill, kind of like, they see a few floating fish that are, a few dead fish that are floating, no big deal, and then they start coming upon more and more and more, and they realize that the acid in the water from the dragon is burning, poisoning these fish. So, that's when they realize, oh, we're pretty close to where this thing must be, maybe like a couple hours away. So and it was also nighttime, so the head of the barbarians is like, okay, well, now we're going to go troll hunting. And they're like, what? It's like, well, we want to, before we go battle a dragon, we want to eat the heart of a troll so that we have troll power. So I very quickly described this sort of montage, or just kind of narrated my way through this scene of they set up this elaborate, like, rope net, and then they send a couple warriors out hunting, and they capture an elk, and they capture a couple of rabbits, and they use the elk and the rabbits as bait in the trap, and eventually a troll comes looking for them, and comes to the bait, and they drop the thing, and they kill the troll. And I'm like, everybody just roll a check on your best stat. Whoever gets the highest gets the killing blow. Like, we're not gonna, there's literally 30 of you, we're not gonna play through a combat versus a single troll. It's not. Let's hand wave that. Let's get through it. So that was fine, and then it was a matter of, I also added some mystical elements to it, so they kill the elk, but then they go and find these very stinky, basically kind of like swamp onions, and they start stuffing the carcass full of these swamp onions, and the shaman, when they bring the elk carcass back, he casts some sort of ritual spell on it, and it makes it, like, instantly sort of rot and molder, and the smell of the rotting onions and the meat just, like, creates this pungent odor that you can just smell probably literally for miles. So there were some nice kind of flares of, if you ever want to do something that's outside of the scope of the player's understanding of magic. So this shaman is going to use his shamanic magic to make this elk even more appetizing to a troll. Basically, he'll make it like super troll bait. He's going to ensorcel it so that it's very appealing, and it gets stinky and moldering, and that trolls will be drawn to it. If you ever want to do something that's outside the scope, well, what spell would that be? Is he using thaumaturgy, or is he using prestidigitation, or, like, anytime you need to get outside of the magic system as it is understood by the players, you can fall back on, he knows a ritual. He spends 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour or 10 minutes or just an action or whatever. But he spends some amount of time casting ritual magic that you just don't know. And they may say, like, I would like to learn that. Okay, well, then that's a whole different kind of quest, and you have to think about what the implications are or whatever. But if you want, like, either a quick flavor type of thing, in terms of that was just a nice extra magical, to make it feel like we're in a magical world, that was just an extra piece of description. Or you want some sort of weird plot hook where every boy born with blonde hair in the last 15 years suddenly takes on half-orc features and grows a foot taller and is prone to these insufferable bouts of rage. Like, you could just invent a ritual that does that. And that's, one of the great innovations from the past few editions of D&D, is that ritual magic doesn't have to obey the standard magic rules, right? So I encourage you to, like, keep that as a little hip pocket thing, that's your out, to give you some extra juice when it comes to setting the scene, describing the world, and making the world more fantastic than the players understand it to be. Because players can get very set upon, well, it doesn't say that in the book, how would he do that? And legitimately so. They don't want to feel like the DM is going to screw them over by just throwing some made-up crap at them. But in this, in a lot of cases, you have some leeway as the GM. But also, just for that little extra random stuff, like, why not make it a ritual? And yes, there's a ritual that makes elk meat that is properly treated it turn into this rancid pile of smelling, disgusting, awful stuff. Who wants to learn that spell? I don't know, whatever. If you do, great. I will probably give it to you for free, depending upon what ends you desire to push it toward. So they captured a troll, and the part that got interesting for the party was they were now going to, the warriors were all eating the heart of the troll. And I'm like, there must be a purpose to this thing, right? So and the great thing about a troll is they regenerate. So the shaman dissects the troll, and then they start this ritual where all the warriors are going to imbibe. And what the shaman does is he takes the heart out, which is still beating because they're keeping the troll like alive, but they're not allowing it to come back together. Like it's not allowing it to reattach itself. And so then the shaman, has the warriors approach, and he shaves off a piece of the heart, and then he flicks it a couple times, and then another miniature heart, kind of springs back into being, and he feeds that to the warrior, and the warrior like gulps it down in one gulp. And I said there must be some consequences to this too, right? So a couple of the warriors swallow this thing, and most of them like begin to like yell and grunt and groan and beat their chests and all that sort of stuff, sweat and sneeze blood and all kinds of, I don't know, overly macho kind of garbage. Anyway, so I decided, well, we're going to have a DC 14 Constitution save to keep this thing down, and I rolled for a few of the guys, and 4 of them missed, right? So the first guy swallows this thing, but it doesn't go all the way down. It kind of lodges in his throat, and then you see, like, his arms, the blood goes into his blood, and he starts to become half troll. And I wanted to like, reinforce the idea that these barbarian warriors were, in fact, barbarians. They were cruel, merciless marauders who live by a strict code of strength. And so Quetna, who is the chief shaman, saw this guy who was transforming into a troll, like obviously had not made his saving throw, and he just points at the guy, and 4 warriors with spears descend on him, and then they grab a burning log out of the bonfire, and they burn the heart out of him, and they kill the guy. So that was also a moment where you can teach the party, okay, this is some insight into the character of these people. They are that ruthless. So that was a nice little scene. But then the offering was made. Who in the party wants to wants to partake of the troll heart ritual? So 4 of them did. I guess 5 of them did. The fighter rogue was like, I'm not having any of this. I don't need troll parts inside of me. One of them tried 3 different times, could not make the saving throw. They did not end up killing him, so that got a little bit weird. But the cleric came to the rescue by casting Lesser Restoration on him. So he ends up, that happens, and he coughs up the heart, and he's okay. They burned a ton of inspiration tokens trying to do this, and ultimately I think 4 of them got it. So then I had to decide what the effect was, and I was really just pantsing this thing right off the top of my head at this point. So I'm like, well, it's like a heroism spell, right? So you gain a few extra hit points, and you're immune to being frightened. So we got done with the ritual, and it was about 8:30, so we're about halfway through our session, and I had a bunch more stuff that I wanted to get through. So at that point, we basically kind of launched into, I laid out the battle mat and laid out a bunch of miniatures to be the tribal warriors, and then I described the scene where there's a lot of thick fog, so you can really only see 30 feet ahead of you, and they sneak up on this construction site, for lack of a better word, where the dragon is exhorting his troll slaves to work faster, because so I rolled 1 random encounter for the night while they were getting ready to let me let somebody in. I rolled 1 random encounter for the night where they were long resting, and they were waiting for they were long resting before they assaulted the dragon's lair the next day, right? I rolled 1 random encounter. I decided this was some lizard men who had been captured, also been captured by the dragon and by the troll, his troll force, and they were also being forced to work on the development of this lair. But they had managed to escape because, according to them, recently the dragon had found something in the mud or underneath the mud that he was trying to get his slave force of trolls to excavate even quicker, and therefore security was pretty lax, and they managed to break away, and they were trying to escape out of the swamp. At which point, Quentin was like, "Oh, great. And which way is the lair?" It's that way? Okay, thank you. Well, be on your way." And as they got, 30 feet away, he nodded to his warriors and they cut down the lizard men. So, again, it was a nice way to convey, like, here's what you can expect. I had foreshadowed, the dragon also has some sort of beast in the water that we've never seen. We're not sure what it is. But also, it was a way to just paint, like, how ruthless these guys are. Like, you're in league with these guys. I don't know how long you want to be in league with these guys, but these are the type of people that they are. Ultimately, it's just lizard men. Like, if it had been innocent humans, then it would have led to an altercation, I think, between the party and the group. But they arrived the next morning on the scene of the of the lair. There were some, like, 3 trolls out front who were working, like, some hills. They're basically, like, digging stuff to make these kind of, like, tunnels that were going underwater and above water and whatnot. There's 3 trolls, and then further back there were some more trolls. They didn't see the dragon initially because they could only. There's a very heavy layer of fog that was. One of the things I decided is that the lair effects of the dragon are starting to take place, but they're not fully implemented, right? So, like, the poisoning of the water, normally that would sort of balance itself out once the lair was established, but until the lair gets established, like, he's just venting all of this acid into the water, and it's terrible. Same thing with the atmosphere, where it's this heavy fog, where you're so deep into it, and the fog is so thick that you can't really tell where the sun is, and you often get lost. So what you do is you go in and you kind of wander around, and then you wander back out, and you try and kind of circumnavigate the swamp, and then you go back in, you make a probe, and that's why it had been taking them so long to track down this dragon. So they got there, they could really only see 30 feet ahead of them, so they couldn't see the dragon. Well, they made an advance, and then the dragon saw them, and because of the way that initiative order fell out, the people up front decided to start attacking the trolls. Now, I think if they had... I had described how emaciated and mistreated the trolls looked. And I think if they had pursued that idea further, they would have maybe led with, hey, you guys, we're here to eliminate the dragon. You guys just stand aside and let us do the dirty work, and you'll be free to go and do whatever you want. The Bard had that idea, but the Bard was like 4th or 5th in terms of the initiative order. So that always gets a little tricky, where he's like, I want to do something, and everybody else is like, well, so do I. Swang. So that's what ended up happening. So they ended up kind of getting bogged down in the front lines of fighting these trolls. And these trolls are like, I'm going to defend myself, right? I'm not gonna let these whelps walk up and stab me with their spears and then not do anything about it. So that whole plan of, like, let's negotiate with the trolls kind of went out the window. But as the combat went on, as the trolls took damage, I definitely gave them will saving throws to figure out, okay, well, if the dragon's not paying attention to me, I'm just going to take off. This is my opportunity to run. And they killed one of the trolls. One of the trolls did end up running off, and the other one, I think he just sort of got ignored by the party. They got into the dragon has blind sight, so he saw them from 120 feet away. Even though I ruled he was a little distracted, so they got fairly close. They got within 60 feet of him or something like that. So they couldn't see him initially, but then he got up and flew across and descended upon the front line of the Uthgardt barbarians. So we got into a combat. The Uthgardt barbarians ended up being basically cannon fodder for the rest of the rest of the party. So the rest of the party kind of like held back or went around the back of the dragon and started dealing damage, while the Uthgardt barbarians stood there, missed a lot with their spears, but were soaking up attacks that the party otherwise would have been hit with. And the 11 die 8 acid damage is definitely something that would have, like, screwed up some players, right? So we had, I don't know, probably 6, 7, 8 round combat. It finally ended where the dragon just had a few hit points left, and it got around to the fighter rogue, who has killed a dragon before. He killed a wormling several sessions back. Well, everybody else ended up, the monk missed 4 times. Literally missed 4 times. Could not roll above a 5 on 4 different 2-hit rolls. So He missed. Then I got to the bard. The bard decided to do something other than attack, or maybe he attacked and he missed. Somebody else went. Yeah, the sorcerer went. He missed, and finally the fighter rogue went, and he managed to hit for 6 points of damage. He ended up killing the dragon. So that was his character. You know, has kind of got a big head about how he's a dragon slayer now because he's killed not one but 2 dragons. We dealt with the fallout. They navigated their way out of the swamp. The woman at Calling Horn said, yes, we'll be happy to accommodate any of your Zentrum brothers who come along this way. You have done a great service to us. You know, your night stay is for free. Enjoy a free meal. Go do whatever you're going to do. So without further ado, I sort of fast-forwarded them to Everland. I rolled for some random encounters, but none actually came up, which was nice. They got to Everland and went and saw their contact as a result of their quest, who took them to this sort of weird private booth where they drank this special wine that teleported them into this tower. And their Zenahero, what's his face, the mage of the Harper mage who runs the place, explained, okay, well, here's the deal. Let's be forthright about it. We know that you're all Zentrum. We don't appreciate the things that you do. We don't like the ways in which you operate, but for the time being, I'm willing to call an alliance between our 2 factions. If you share the information that you have, we'll share the information that we have, and we will grant you access at my pleasure to the teleportation circles that lead between here and Waterdeep and Yartar and Everland and Neverwinter, etc. They were like, well, we might have to talk to our boss about that. And he's like, by all means, you want to go to Waterdeep? Here, step in the circle. Pff, boom, they're in Waterdeep. So then they went. We're really tight on time at this point. We're at like 10 minutes left. So they went to Waterdeep. They talked to Chulton Helmstar, their boss. He was, filled him in on all the details. He's very disturbed. He's like, yes, do whatever. Share information with the Harpers. Make sure that you share everything you share with them, you share with us. See if you can find out how these teleportation circles operate, how they were constructed, what sort of materials or magics are needed. We'd like to build our own network of teleportation portals, but we don't understand how it all works. So that's a little side mission for you guys. Oh, by the way, there's a messenger here. I don't know, he just showed up. What's this all about? Come on in. And he comes in, and I had a letter printed up from Jorgen saying, hello, my little friends. The good news is I made it to Citadel Felbar. I've seen many strange things, but the good news is I'm well, and I have found my axe. Now I need you to come help me get it back. I know where it is, but I don't have it. There's evil to be slaughtered. Come join me. Make haste. And that was the end of the session. So we took a couple detours there in terms of like some structural DMing advice, but that's the recap of the session. I want to, at this point, cover something about NPCs being the voice of the DM. And it's a couple things. I think I put a lot of thought into what kind of voice and accent this NPC was going to have, right? So they're sort of described as these, for lack of a better way to put it, they're described as essentially sort of like a Native American type of people, or definitely a native level of technology, but also like very barbaric, and they're neutral evil, and they're all mean, and that was, it's not the way that I want to, I mean, it really has a lot of parallels with Native American culture, especially because they have these burial mounds where they have these giant trinkets and whatnot. And I need to go back and listen to the podcast episode that D&D, the official WotC podcast episode where Chris Perkins talks about the background on those people, because they play such a prominent role in chapter 3 and 4. But my reading of it, without doing that research, was, oh, okay, well, the easy approach here is these are some sort of Native American people, and they're supposed to be painted as such, but they're also evil bad guys who uh, are malicious and practice kind of these terrible rituals and don't trust magic and etc. Like I said earlier, like they're essentially like reskinned orcs. They're orcs in reskinned to be attached to a human culture where they wear skins and wield shamanic magic and stuff just like a tribe of orcs does. Well, then why not make them orcs, right? If you just want them to be cardboard cutout villains, it's easy to make them orcs. I wanted them to have a little more depth than that. So where this plays out is when I'm choosing the voice for this NPC, we're going to have this interaction with this guy. When I'm choosing this voice, I don't want to do kind of what I would call an offensive me Tarzan type of voice, right? Like that's not, I didn't feel that that was appropriate. So what did I ended up going with? But I still wanted something that had kind of a limited vocabulary. I ended up going with sort of a Russian type of accent for these guys. Like it seems foreign. They're from the north, so it kind of makes sense that they're like Siberian snow people. And it's also less just like blatant kind of blackface type of acting, right? That's not, I did not want to convey them because there's two pieces to this whole interaction. There's the DM presenting this culture however you want to present it, and then there's the PCs responding to it in a way that they think is appropriate. And if you set it up as me, big chief warrior, me here to slay dragon, then you're putting on the table that this type of communication and this type of characterization is okay. And not only that, it's an invitation for them to treat you in a very one-dimensional or stereotypical type of way. And that can be gross, right? Like if everybody at your table is cool with it, like it's your game, fine. You guys figure it out. But also, I think it's a fantasy world where there's room for invention and fantasy and sensitivity where, like, let's not just go for the low-hanging fruit. That's going to feel very on the nose and is probably going to seem somewhat disappointing. Now, when he talks in a little bit of Russian accent and we are here to hunt a great worm. You eat heart of worm, you become strong like worm. Sure, it's a little Rocky and Bullwinkle. It's also, stereotypical, but it's not stereotypical in the way that they're dressed and the way that their culture is described. It's not as stereotypical and offensive, right? You've married something that's different onto this, to what's the appearance and what's been presented. So, yeah. So that's one thing, like choosing an appropriate voice. I was like, I want something that it's okay to have broken English, but it's not been used for the past, 60 or 70 years as like a way for white people to make fun of people who are different, right? So that's something like that's maybe being the voice of the NPC, the DM being the voice of the NPC. The NPC is also the voice of the DM, right? So the nice thing about having the party ally with this group of tribal warriors is it enables me to share information about the world that they don't have to go out and discover firsthand. Oh, the great worm, this Bulgorganax, he's been chased from lair by by giants from hills, from mountains, way east of here, northeast of here. So he tried to make a new lair. We're trying to trap him and kill him. Okay. Oh, what kind of giants? Tall, red hair. I have not seen, but I have heard they're very strong. All of this stuff. That when we talked earlier about you're throwing a rock in the pond of the world and you're watching those ripples go out, he's an observer, in the ripples, and so rather than he can see further into the pond than maybe the party can, so they don't have to journey over to this part of the world and go see what the giants are up to. They can hear it from him and either accept it as actual truth, or maybe he's an unreliable narrator or whatever. So that's a big advantage to any role-playing scene, but also a big advantage to having your NPCs, or having NPCs introduced along the way to maybe a big set-piece battle or whatever. So now I don't have to have a scene where afterwards there's a note left behind, or they interrogate some prisoners. Like, I can actually convey a bunch of this information ahead of the battle, when typically it would be like, oh guys, we forgot to capture any prisoners. I wish we could have talked to somebody. No, here's the third party who knows. You don't need to capture troll prisoners. Let those trolls run off. Who cares? It also allows you to front load this information, and then you can focus on the combat just being the combat. And then if the session has to end, then the combat ends, and that's that. But the players aren't left wondering, like, is there something we missed? Did we not learn something? Like, well, I wonder what those guys were doing there. They know a lot. They know all of why those guys were there and what they were doing there. And I only have to fill in a few pieces of information. Oh, there was this old monolith that you found just the tip of it. It looks like it actually had been corroded and worn. You found a few magic items, these tunnels, da-da-da-da-da, all that kind of stuff. So by preloading the information that you might discover on the back end of an encounter, I now give that encounter kind of like a quick, I can give it a quick capstone and cut, right? So that's another way that the NPC, being the voice of the DM, allows you to precede and foreshadow information in a way that's not necessarily like an interrogation, right? We've talked about interrogations before, and I'm not going to get into it, but it's a useful way to vary how you disperse information about what's going on in the world. So Baroon asks, as a GM who does accents and voices, how do you go about learning accents? And I don't have a lot of great tips for you, because since I was very young, I have been interested in comedy and acting. And that means that I have always been fascinated by the different ways that people talk. And it's also, as a result of that, I've tried to imitate the ways that people talk, because I think how you express yourself is fascinating, right? How you speak says a lot about kind of who you are. That seems trite and cliche, but it's important. It's definitely, in my regular day job, it's very important to know how people talk and express themselves, and to maybe be able to mimic that. So I've spent a lot of my life trying to mimic those people, or mimic different people. And also, I think, like, you listen to Monty Python and you try to pick up the British accent, or you listen to people from the South and you try and pick up their accent. You talk and you tell jokes. Part of it too is, like, I learned a foreign language. I learned German. I went and lived in Germany. So having to actually pronounce words that are dramatically different than your native language helps you hear what is happening in someone else's mouth to do that pronunciation, and gives you a little bit of an ear for it. I will say, like, the best way to describe it is like learning a musical instrument, because I do believe that those accents are in fact an expression of music. Okay, so I'm gonna give you two kind of tangible hints, right? And the one tangible hint I will give you is, you can buy or go on the internet and listen to accent tapes. Sometimes I'm skeptical about them because they're done by one person who believes that he's mastered 35 different accents, and it's not necessarily true. But there are definitely books like that have. I'm gonna have to close the window here in a minute. I'm gonna have to close up here in a minute because it's almost 3 o'clock. But there are definitely books that you can get, or I'm sure at the time it was CDs. I'm sure there's places on YouTube and stuff where you can learn an accent. They'll teach you a British accent. I'll be right back. Well, it's going to get a little noisy regardless, but so that's one thing that you can do is you actually do some research on YouTube and listen to native speakers. I had to do something that was a North Carolina accent recently, and I don't know if I pulled it off, but you can Google, go on YouTube and look for authentic North Carolina accents and hear somebody talk about the words that they pronounce different and things that they say different, etc. So you have resources at your command to listen to this. I think the best thing to do, of course, is to indulge in media from that particular area of the world, or at least set in that area of the world, right? So if you want to learn a British accent, go on Netflix and watch some British TV shows. It's remarkably instructive, right? So that's one thing. The other part of it that I would suggest is that your characters have an attitude, okay? And that's maybe more important than the accent itself, is that your character is imbued with kind of a speed and a rhythm. Right? Their attitude about the world informs how stilted they talk, how fast they talk, how clipped their pronunciation is, etc. If I'm a very proper British person, and I am very, very disappointed in everything that I've heard here in front of me, well, I shall tell you forthwith that I disapprove. Okay? So that's somebody who's very, stock, rod stiff, upright, etc., right? That's part of it. On the other hand, well, I could be this sort of very laid back French sort of person who is not interested in speaking in particularly clean, easy lines of a very distinct way. I have my thoughts forming a bit at a time. They come out when they do. It's a long, languorous type of attitude. Very reflective, very calm, very... What is the word? Loopy, a little bit loopy. So that's having a rhythm to your character. If you have an attitude, you can plug into a rhythm to your character, and that will help you paint that accent. Sometimes I will use that rhythm to help me decide what I'm going to say next. When I'm really a long, slow, kind of loping kind of character, that gives me time to think about what kind of information do I want to dispense, what sort of attitude do I want to convey. Okay, so start with those basics, very direct, short, to the point, very low, slow, sloppy. You can tell even my physicality changes there, right? And then ideally, at some point, you may want to play those rhythms back and forth, okay? So do something kind of slow and ponderous, and then when the guy gets excited, he gets very excited, and he gets very staccato. That sort of thing. So those are some very basic tips on learning, or at least implementing an accent. Just try it a few times, use it sparingly, or maybe come up, just record yourself on your phone, play it back, and hear what it sounds like, and compare it to things that are on the internet, etc. But it is, final thing I will just come back to is that it is like a musical instrument, and it's like playing a musical instrument, and music ebbs and flows and changes rhythm and has crescendos where it gets louder and it gets softer. Use those tools, because whether you're nailing the accent doesn't so much matter as is what you're doing interesting, right? That's honestly, that's 99% of my accent work, is either I'm going to fall back to my default German because I can do that, off the top of my head, no problem, or I'm just going to like play around and make this as goofy and committed as I can, which seems like two different sides of the coin. But like if you're committed to it, as long as you're not annoying your players, go for it. They may not respond with an accent, but they will certainly like engage with you and know that, oh, this is that guy. Oh, this is that guy who was always using weird metaphors. So, all right, it's 3:03. Unfortunately, I have to wrap it up. I want to thank all of you so much for all of your time and attention over the past few months. I will be back in January with more Disorganized play. We're about halfway through the season of Storm King's Thunder. I think we're about wrapped up with Chapter 3. They're going to go back to Citadel Fel, or they're going to go back to Everland and then go to Citadel Felbar. And my intent is that we're going to launch basically into Chapter 7. They're going to go try and take out the Fire Giant Forge. So I'll have some reading to do over the break for that, which is fine. And I expect it will be a fairly challenging but satisfying next portion of the adventure. So we'll have some more to talk about then in January. In the meantime, I want to wish you all the best. The happiest of holidays here. Let's take a look at our calendar for what's going on for the rest of the week. So that was Disorganized Play. You'll be able to catch me later on this afternoon in about an hour and a half. Yeah, about an hour and a half. You'll be able to catch me over on Geek and Sundry. I'm doing the last D&D The Improvised Campaign show over there, so I'll be DMing that. We're having a special guest, Paul Hungerford, coming in, playing the Bishop, so please join us for that. But in the meantime, tomorrow night, it is the season finale of Call of Cthulhu Black Bag. The country is going to hell in a handbasket. Will our heroes be able to save themselves, or will they also burn with the rest of the nation? Mr. West Otis is DMing. It shall be epic. Saturday, we have Masks, New Generation with Mr. Stephen Pope, and at 5 o'clock we have Phoenix Dawn Command, hosted by Mr. Sax Carr. Saturday at 2 o'clock, it is Maximum Miniatures, painting minis with Iron Tusk. I don't remember everybody who is on the docket to paint. I'm not going to be there to paint. I would love to do that, but it's a great show. Please join in and get some tips on how to paint up those minis. I know that those Reaper Bones are not far away. I don't know that. I'm hoping Reaper Bones are not far away. So brush up on those painting skills. You're going to have some time off over the holidays. Why not make yourself a little band of orcs or trolls? You will use them. Trust me. So that's it for Disorganized Play the Recap Show. I want to thank you all again for tuning in. I want to thank Fockwad and all of our other mods who so tirelessly donate their time to help keep the channel safe and clean. And until next time, let's dungeon! 5 for 5!